Hello, good evening, everyone. Welcome to yet another edition of Bharatvaarta. Today, I'm filling in for Roshan, and we have our resident political expert Rohit Jayaraman, who will speak about the four assembly elections. Rohit, welcome to Bharatvaarta.
Hi Nimish, thanks for having me. Great to be back here as usual.
And of course, we are doing the. Sorry for some background noise. About, give me a moment. Let me just. Today's Shivaji Jayanti, so clearly everyone's getting excited. And that's where the noise is coming from. But before we start, Rohit, I'll ask the question and mute myself to avoid the background noise. But quick question: what do you think? While we go state by state, Punjab is the one which seems to be getting more news flow noise compared to UP. What is your read there so far? What's been the story of Punjab over the last 30-35 days? Would be good to get a start. And I'll just start with some my reflections. Clearly, the BJP seems to be smelling something. The Prime Minister's rallies, his interview today, he meeting the Sikh community. That's one theme. Everyone seems to be attacking Kejriwal, which points to this. So, what's the general theme?
Sure Nimish. So I think we had done a podcast on Punjab a few months back. I think when Captain Amrinder Singh had been replaced by Mr. Channi as the CM from the Congress, but I think this was before the withdrawal of the farm laws, etc. So what's basically happened in Punjab, I think, in building on from what we discussed in the last podcast, is there's been a spiral of things, right? Like starting from, if you go back to let's say 2019 Lok Sabha elections, right? From then, there's been a spiral of things that have happened. We started with, of course, the farm laws. We started, you could say, with the CAA, right? Like just like the CAA was the first, real beginning of opposition to the current NDA government after 2019. That all over India, that was the case in Punjab also. The more interesting thing we have was the Akali Dal also, which was then in the NDA, also went against the government on the CA, right? That really showed the signs of real strain between the BJP and the Akalis, because unlike Nitish Kumar or some of the other NDA allies who have even historically had Muslim vote base, etc. Clearly, Akali Dal doesn't have much of a Muslim vote base, so they clearly went against it on some other reasons, which even maybe ideological, right? And starting from there, then you had the pandemic. It was followed by the farm laws, the ordinance. Then, while initially it seemed to have not met with a lot of opposition, at least in the national level. I don't know exactly what happened in Punjab. Then you had the Akali Dal breaking the alliance. Harsimrat Kaur resigned from the union ministry. Then you had the entire farm protests, right? So the whole camping around Delhi, I think, probably started in late 2020, where the Congress government of Amrinder Singh at that time did provide, a lot of support at some level to these the protesters. Then there was a bunch of things, and when things look like around I think around July, when I had at least visited Punjab, it was very clear that the AAP was on the upswing. And AAP will bring you to see some context on the AAP here. Like the AAP made its first real breakthrough in Punjab in 2014. Then they had made a play for power in 2017, which ended up in a fiasco. Now there are a lot of people who have been giving lots of theories on what exactly happened in that year in that election, including how in the last 3 days there was a bomb blast, and that's how there was urban consolidation behind the Congress to defeat AAP, and all sorts of theories are floating around. But I think if you look at the results, you could see that the AAP really probably was never really in a position to break through in that election. Like it's not like they could they swept the rural seats or they swept any region. They were quite far behind actually. The end of the day, if you look at it, in many districts, they were a distant third in vote share, at least in half the state actually. So whatever might have been the last minute drama that happened, some level the AAP was a bit overhyped in 2017. After this fiasco, AAP completely went into a death spiral in Punjab, with most of its MPs leaving the party. I think of its 4 MPs, two of them left the party between 2017 and 2019. Only two of them contested. One who, Professor Sadhu Singh, he lost his deposit or came nearly close to losing it. I think he was around 16% vote share. Only Bhagwant Man managed to win. And AAP was generally a non-entity, right, in 2019. It was, the state seemed to have gone back to its days of general bipolarity. But this whole farm loss thing gave a massive boost to AAP because, while the Congress did try to, it was at the forefront of the protests nationally. This Congress government did help out in the state. Also, people generally distrusted the Congress, right? The farm laws seemed to have been the last straw for a lot of people who were generally tired of the whole Badal Amrinder Singh duopoly. That helped up, and that was a scene I think a few months back. Then Congress disrupted everything, right? And I mean, it made sense from the Congress's perspective because they probably were on the way to losing if status quo continued. They disrupted everything by making Charanjit Singh Channi the CM with a clear idea of consolidating the Dalit vote, right? Like every single what do you call, every single interview of the Congress after that, Rahul Gandhi, Priyanka Gandhi, all other Congress leaders outside Punjab, everyone keeps pointing to how Mr. Channi is a symbol of Dalit aspirations, right? And I mean, that's the whole thing started from that it's a 32 the 32% Dalit vote is what is going to really drive the Congress's fortunes going forward. There was Navjot Singh Sidhu was a joker in the pack, and Congress has done a really good job, you could say, of sidelining him. He's now the victim of a pincer attack by the Akali Dal, which has sort of made him in real danger, I would say, at least that's a consensus opinion of him losing his own seat. So that's one part of it. What's also happened is that the Akali Dal kept quiet and they've maintained a fairly sustained campaign, right? So while they're in no contention for power, it does look like they have some sort of, they'll have a reasonably respectable vote share. And what the BJP has done with the whole thing has been quite interesting, right? It first started by withdrawing the farm laws, which, if you look at it, was something that people really didn't expect. I mean, so it was obviously, you could think of it as a huge national loss of face for the party, but they've sort of spun it in such a way that at least outside Punjab, it's really a non-issue, except maybe a few hardcore whiners on Twitter, right? I mean, but except that, it's really a non-issue. And in Punjab, it's made them like not hated, at least, right? Especially among Sikhs. Hindus, it's given them a new lease of life. And, joining hands with Amrinder Singh has given them quite a bit of respectability in the sense that I don't think the Punjab Lok Congress is even relevant in a single seat outside the seat of Amrinder Singh himself. But it's just given the BJP itself a veneer of respectability, right? And that's what it's using to mop up votes in what were its traditional seats. I mean, Punjab has always had some sort of BJP vote base, right? BJP started life in India, the modern Jansangh, primarily as a party of Punjabi Hindu refugees. And there are multiple places in the cities of Punjab, etc., where that tradition still lives on. And that's where at least the BJP is really putting its effort. So, but I still think the AAP is the front runner. And Congress is making really desperate attempts to catch up, but I'm not sure how that will play out.
And I mean, you mentioned 2017 when AAP was third in many places. Maybe it was never poised to, and it was more a hype. What do you think changes now? I mean, and obviously, I'm referring to a lot of news about Akalis making some sort of a comeback. They were like completely dismissed. Akalis gaining strength. Is this hurting Congress? Maybe the anti-incumbency is being split. Is it hurting? Sorry, AAP, because the anti-incumbency is being split. Is it hurting Congress or BJP? Probably uniformly across the last 10 12 days, everyone seems to be saying that there is at least some upsurge in vote share potentially of BJP. What is it? Is it hurting the anti-incumbency factor in favor of AAP and hence benefiting the Congress or not? How will this play out? And I know there are regions, separate regions, but is there some region specific nuance which will happen here, or just a broad brush? What is your view here?
So honestly, it seems pretty uh, I think there's a lot of things that people are uncertain about, right? I mean, even the last few opinion polls seem to go all over the place. Like, you see voter, which has been which had been polling for a while. So they had polls going on for a few months. In this last poll, they suddenly said that Congress is third. So it's difficult to, at least from the polls or even the narratives, understand what exactly is happening, because I can see certain pollsters, tell that Congress will get us majority on its own, while others are saying Congress will finish third. So there's a lot of things. There's a lot of things that are up in the air, really, right? And if you ask me what it's about, is that this is really a setting the base election, right? Because there have been so many things that have changed between 2017 or even 2019 and 14, or 2012 is of course even like in the case of Punjab politics is probably a different millennium. It's really everything has completely changed. So my simple hypothesis, and I may of course be completely wrong, because this point of time it's a bit difficult to grasp what exactly is happening on the ground, is that at least in the last election, what had happened was there was a lot of hype around AAP, uh, and there was also a hype that AAP was a separatist, or at least had some portions of it which were which had separatist sympathies, right? I mean, that had a big role in two ways. One is that, first of all, AAP, as I said before, I think probably was never in a position to win the 2017 election, because if you look at the results, you can clearly see that they simply didn't have the base. It's not like if you had a base in July and then people make up these kind of canards about you that in 6 months your base completely whittles away. Like you may be down to a third place, but it should be a respectable third, not be a situation where you literally in the teens, your vote share is in the teens. So probably in a lot of places, AAP really didn't have much of a vote share to start with in 2017. On top of that, this whole thing meant that everyone consolidated against AAP, right? And in the atmosphere of 2017, that meant Congress was the obvious beneficiary, because one, there was a lot of anti-incumbency against the Akali Dal. This The government had run for 10 years, and by the end of its term, it was literally running on fumes, right? People had a problem with almost everything that the government did. So you could say that it was almost like a situation of the UPA 2 government, right? They were literally a sort of dead men walking. So there was no way that any anti-AAP sentiment was going to benefit the Akalis. The BJP at that time was tied to the Akalis. If you see 2014, Punjab was one state where the Modi wave really had no impact, right? Like, even if you look at individual assembly seats, Lok Sabha seats, you can see that that a very large number of the votes that the NDA got in 2014 actually came from Akali supporters, not really BJP supporters. Now, this would interestingly change in 2019, but let's leave that aside. Uh, so clearly, the BJP was in no position to capitalize. The Congress had in Captain Amrinder Singh, a person who had managed to get himself an image of being a nationalist or something like that. So he had also managed to keep himself away from what I would call as the general toxicity around the Congress's national brand, right? I mean, it was almost like he was running a sub-regional, a regional outfit of his own, which of course also was benefiting from the Congress's traditional base. But that whole thing was there that this Amrinder Singh's Congress is different from the Congress. That probably benefited them, right? I mean, so there were 2-3 things that led to a solid consolidation of anti-AAP votes against in favor of the Congress. At the same time, if you look at it, it's not like the Akalis got completely wiped out. I think the NDA got 31% vote, which is fairly respectable in a three-way contest. So while the Akalis, by and large, held on to a lot of their core vote, I think a lot of the BJP vote, the entire floating vote, especially in the cities. I was just seeing a Twitter thread where someone had helpfully broken down seats in Punjab by their degree of urbanization. And in the top urban category, I think there were 15 seats or 14 seats, and the Congress had won almost all, right? Like 2 or 3 seats were missing. So clearly shows that, this is how what had happened in 2007, 2017. I don't think that's going to happen in 2022. Right? The Congress has changed its pitch. AAP has also changed its pitch, and there's no anti-incumbency against the Akalis, and the BJP is no longer with the Akalis. So even BJP supporters who don't like the Akalis, they have the BJP, while a lot of them did vote for the Congress before. The Akalis are no longer facing anti-incumbency. There's there is a fair there is a school of thought in Punjab that says Akali government is definitely better than the Congress government. So you could say that they're definitely not facing anti-incumbency. The Congress has changed its pitch from sort of regional party to now Channi seem like he's epitomizing the National Congress at its best, right? I mean, so like it's clearly part of the National Congress brand, and I mean that brand is fairly toxic everywhere else. So clearly, it needs to be seen whether they can break that in Punjab. AAP has tried its best to shed its soft separatist image. It's tried really hard. It's tried to use certain statements by people like Balram Jakar. Uh, I think his name is Sunil Jakar. Sorry, Balram Jakar is his father. That said that he wasn't made a CM because he was a Hindu. The AAP has gone after that. So this is so there's a so that's probably explains why this whole Khalistan thing came up in the last 2 days, right? To put AAP on the back foot. I don't know if it's the Congress that's driving it or the BJP or both, but clearly there's been a concerted effort, and that shows that AAP till now at least has been able to stay away from that. So I think all of that together, if you ask me, will point to a better performance for AAP, maybe the Akalis and the BJP and all three of these parties or the Congress as compared to 2017. You're on mute, Nimish.
Two last questions. I think one you mentioned about Congress shifting to a Dalit kind of positioning, making Channi CM. What do you think of that positioning? And also, uh, I mean, I know BSP is no longer the force it was in Punjab, but there could be pockets where it could be sort of effective. So, how do you see? And obviously, Dalit vote is not. I mean, nowhere in the country is it like a monolith. There are sub segments here. So, is there any nuance there in terms of which way Dalit vote, the Sikh versus Hindu, Mazhabis, Ravidasis? I mean, what's your take on that vote? I mean, is will it get Congress more Dalit votes than it otherwise would have, and would that be enough for significant enough? Yeah.
I think that's a good question, right? Because the Congress and everyone who seems to buy that this appointment of Channi was a monster stroke seems to think that it's possible to mobilize these 32% Dalit vote as one and make them vote as Dalits. Now, Punjab Dalits are like Dalits everywhere else in India, really divided into multiple groups, right? I mean, because at the end of the day, as I've said before, Dalit is it's a government category, right? Different. It's each of those castes have their individual identity. Some of them have split in recent years. Like for instance, a large portion of what outside Punjab is called the Jatav caste. Parts of those have become the Adi Dharmis, right? So while that's technically a belief system, in practice, I understand it's practically a now in section of the caste. So in Punjab, at least there are two, three large Dalit groups, right? I think in the Doba region is dominated by, and generally districts around it are dominated by groups that otherwise are, the Jatavs, the Ravidasyas, the Ramdasyas, all groups that are, sort of the same larger group, right? Subgroups of the same larger group, which interestingly is the group that Mr. Channi belongs to. This group has, by and large, traditionally supported the Congress itself. Though it's also the group where BSP had its most success when it used to be active in Punjab. I think this group accounts for roughly 35 to 40% of the total Dalit population of Punjab. So if you look at it that way, they're around 13 to 14% of Punjab. If you look at the other large group, that's the Mazhabis and the Valmikis. So they are, I think, around again almost similar in number or slightly more. They're concentrated in other regions of the state, and they're traditionally been more of Akali supporters. And just like how you have the Jatav non-Jatav rivalry in UP or the Mahar Matang rivalry in Maharashtra, the left hand side, right hand side rivalry in Karnataka. There are rivalries among these groups also in Punjab, and they're fairly uh, sustained, right? Like Punjab, interestingly, was the first state which had what is called subcategorization among Dalits before it, got struck down at a national level.
That was
So
done by Gyani Jail Singh, right? If I'm not mistaken, or
yeah,
was
I
it?
think either him or yeah, I think it was him only, or yeah, it was him. I think in the 70s.
Hmm.
So it's a very old rivalry, and that rivalry is still there. So I'm not sure how that rivalry will get papered over by. Then there are the Rai Sikhs who are there mostly in Firozpur and other regions of Western Malwa, but who have again traditionally been Akali supporters have sort of drifted away. So I'm not sure how Mr. Channi can bring all of these groups together, right? I mean, it seems to be a bit. Uh, it seems to be a bit of an up in the air kind of a result. The only time Dalits across subsects have voted anywhere in India in favor of one party really has been in the recent past has been the BSP in its heyday, right? Because like you could say the 2007, 2012 elections, even 2014 in UP. But otherwise, Dalits everywhere in India have been split a bit. And also, I mean, just from a socio-economic perspective, Punjab is a highly feudal state. And Dalits are, by and large, the community that, and especially this is true for the Mazhabis in Malwa, community that does vote based on, what their others in the village,
Landlords
yeah,
also.
what the landlords, etc., tell them to do. So fighting an election purely on Dalit consolidation is a bit of a gamble. Now, I don't know if it will work. I can't. I don't want to prejudge the result, but at least if you ask me, it's definitely a gamble the Congress has taken, and I'm not sure when people, at least commentators and Twitter pollsters, etc., speak about Dalit consolidation, whether they've really thought about all of this, or maybe they don't want to bring it to people's notice, and I don't know what the idea is, but at least I haven't seen serious discussions of how what is the reasons why Mr. Channi will appeal to other subsects of Dalits more than the fact that he is a Dalit by categorization.
Got it. Now, of course, we'll come back to this later. Since we're on the topic of Dalits and BSP, and since we spoke about, uh, so I mean, let's move straight to Uttarakhand. I thought we'll go there, and again, I mean, BSP used to be a fairly decent presence, and I'm hitting it straight there because probably I haven't read much about it in the media or anywhere else. Of course, it's a bipolar fight between BJP and Congress, but I would say Dalits seem to have a significant presence in maybe at least one fourth of the seats, 25% of the seats. Do you think BSP has a role to play there? They did increase their vote share in 2019 compared to 2014. I think it's Haridwar seat. And is there something we should be reading in that trend, or do you think there's a BSP factor at play at all in the Uttarakhand election? Let me put it this way, because I haven't read about it. So if there is none, then we can straight away dismiss and move on. But would be curious about it.
That's an interesting question, right? Because if you look at the Uttarakhand assembly elections, and this probably makes it similar to another small state, other small states that are going for the elections in this phase like Goa and Manipur, the vote share of the winning party is rarely been very high, right? Like if you look at 2012, which is when Congress and BJP had a very close fight, and Congress just about sneaked through. I think the two parties together had around 60 to 62% of the vote. Now, for a ostensibly bipolar state, that's a really small percentage for the top two parties, right? Because clearly the others are equal to them or more than them, and BSP is historically been the largest among the others. Now, I think what's happened with the BSP is that if you look at the politics of North India in general, right, Muslims and Dalits have, especially Jatav Dalits. I mean, we just spoke about it in the context of Punjab also. Especially Jatav Dalits have been the backbone of the Congress everywhere in North India. Even in a state like UP, where of course they're no longer relevant. That's also because these groups moved on, right? So the same is the case in Uttarakhand, and literally every vote the BSP gets from Jatavs or even for that matter Muslims, where they feel strong Muslim candidates, is a vote taken away from the Congress, and that's what's made it consistently difficult for the Congress to really cross a heavy margin, right? I mean, all these elections have been very close. 2002, 7, 12, three very close elections. 2017 was a blowout due to a variety of factors. I mean, the prime minister was very popular. The Congress government was very unpopular. Half the MLAs in the Congress had also sort of defected to the BJP. So the Congress was really down in the dumps in 2017. So the BJP had a huge win. But the BSP has been nationally on a downward trend since 2012, right? Since Mayawati lost power. If you look at it in 2014, they couldn't get any Lok Sabha seats in UP. 2017, they underperformed a lot in UP. In Punjab, their politics has really weakened over the entire last 2 decades, right? And that's sort of been the case in Uttarakhand also. But 2019, gave green shoots to the BJP both in Punjab, and if you look at it a bit more closely in Uttarakhand, like in Punjab, the BSP came out of nowhere in its old strongholds in Doba to get a reasonable number of votes. Like I think in Jalandhar they were about 20% of the vote, which is like pretty big. I mean that almost makes it a tri-corner fight, right? Even in Hoshiarpur and Anandpur Sahib, which are the other two seats, they were not too behind. Like they were at least viable. Even in Uttarakhand in 2019, they seem to have at least in seats where their support base in good numbers have increased their numbers. So let's see how it goes in 2022. One thing I think we need to notice: 2019 was really bad for the Congress, right, in North India. Like because of Balakot or general toxicity surrounding Rahul Gandhi, and you can't, like, there's no hiding away from that in a Lok Sabha election, right? I mean, in assembly election, local factors matter, state leaders matter, but national election, there's like nothing to block that. So that might be the reason why even core groups that have been core Congress supporters might have gone back to looking at the BSP as an alternative, just because the Congress was just seen as utterly not up to their expectations for whatever reason.
So elsewhere in Uttarakhand, I mean, would the trends differ between hills and plains in general? I mean, clearly there are some noises around that. I mean, would be curious to understand, is there like a geographical dispersion there where, or would we see a uniform result like what we saw in 2017? What's your thought there? I mean, of course, BJP is also being hurt by this multiple CM changes, three CMs within a year. So that's been a bug or a feature, whatever you might call it, happened in the previous BJP governments as well in Uttarakhand. But how do you see between hills and plains? Is there a different dynamic in the two regions there?
Uh, I think there's a very clear demographic difference, right? I mean, the hills are, while Uttarakhand itself as a state, I think, and as per 2011, is census is around 83 to 84% Hindu. The plains are, substantially less Hindu, especially the two southernmost districts of Haridwar and Udham Singh Nagar, which I think together account for almost 20 of the 70 seats. I think it's around 17 to 19 seats. These two districts put together come to both these districts. Hindus are, I think, around 66 to 65 to 66% population individually. And, once you also a good number of Hindus in both these districts are Dalits, especially Jatav Dalits. So there's clearly a different demographic feature here, which makes both these districts more similar to their southern neighbors, right? Like Saranpur or, Moradabad, Rampur, etc., which are very similar demographics, right? I mean, slightly more Muslims in all of these districts. Saranpur, I think, is 40%, and Moradabad and Rampur are around 50% each. But broadly, you're seeing, you can see that there's a clear demographic thing, right? And that means that at least there's a solid anti-BJP vote to be tapped, especially among Muslims. While in the plains, that's not the case, right? I mean, the hills. The hills are much more, Hindu dominated, especially upper caste Hindu dominated. You can sort of compare it to parts of Himachal, which are very similar demographics. So what happens in these regions essentially is that, uh, like how does the Congress win in these regions in an assembly election, right? Like if you look at the Lok Sabha results in both Uttarakhand and Himachal in 2019, like BJP vote shares are above 65% in almost all the hilly regions. So what happens in an assembly election is that local factors matter a lot more because there's no demographic or communal issue to come forth, right? So people completely vote on local candidates on local issues. So that really helps the non-BJP party, which in both states is the Congress. While in the plains they have a solid demographic base anyway to sort of, so that makes the job of the BJP a bit trickier in an assembly election in these states, and that's probably why states that otherwise vote fairly overwhelmingly for the BJP at Lok Sabha level, you see these issues in the assembly level. And I think this will, like, even if, by some reason the BJP sweeps again, like it did in 2017, you can see differences in vote share, you can see differences in margin, etc., between the plains and the hills. And those differences will remain because, I mean, just the numbers, the demographics here are different, right? So it's not a demographically homogeneous state. I've not even gotten into the more subtle differences between Garhwal and Kumaon because I think that will be going into too much micro detail, but at least at a plain versus hill level, there's definitely a difference.
So if that trend were to be, I mean, generally given Prime Minister's popularity and maybe the UPCM's popularity, if you were to be a betting man, would you guess that BJP will cross the hump this time in Uttarakhand? I mean, of course, there's a lot of negativity, but in the last 35, 40 days, I think probably particularly Harak Singh Rawat's expulsion seemed to have completely stem the negativity, at least in the media. I don't know about the on ground, but the perception that BJP is losing post that strong decision, probably at least from a perception perspective, that negativity was reversed. And at the same time, post elections, you've already seen 3, 4 BJP MLAs come out and accuse other leaders of sabotaging them, which is never good news from a party perspective, means they are losing. How do you see these two contrasting events of the last 30 odd days?
I think if you ask me, the fundamentals in Uttarakhand always pointed to a fairly comfortable BJP victory, right? Because in the sense that the hills are like very strong. There's a lot of support here for the prime minister as well as you mentioned, the UPCM, right? I mean, both of them have have strong support in Uttarakhand. Uh, the state has consistently voted for the prime minister in the Lok Sabha elections. Even the 2017 elections were a vote on the prime minister. And if you see his, campaign schedule, he did 3 rallies in Uttarakhand, right? I mean, which is quite a lot considering the size of the state. And he's, as compared to UP, where he drastically cut down the number of rallies he did this time as compared to say 2017. So he's clearly made Uttarakhand sort of a prestige battle for him. And obviously, the state that has a huge groundswell of support for him in the hills and even in the plains, right? While in the plains, obviously, there's a demographic factor that there is a good population of groups that obviously don't share this opinion of the prime minister. The hills, it's almost literally one-way traffic, right? So it's that versus whatever local factors might have been there. There were definitely issues around ticket distribution. There have been rebels, but there were rebels on both sides. And of course, you saw, as you rightly mentioned, people, coming out and saying that there's been internal sabotage, etc. Interestingly, today, Harak Singh Rawat, whom you mentioned, came out and said that, the election, whatever were the local factors, people seem to have voted for the prime minister. So that is, he is one person who seems to have read a BJP win in the offing. There's also been a lot of chatter on women voters and their role in Uttarakhand, especially that there's been a higher turnout of women voters and they are more pro BJP due to certain welfare schemes that both the center and the state government have done. I mean, there's been definitely a higher turnout of women voters, but that might just be due to the fact that Uttarakhand is a state where a lot of people migrate out for work, especially in the hills. So it's more likely that the women are still in the state while the men are just not there. So I wouldn't want to read too much into differential gender turnout, but clearly the fundamentals are there, and the BJP did seem to get its act together over the last 30 days, right, as you mentioned. So, I mean, my bet is on a BJP win in Uttarakhand. Obviously, there will be a slippage from the landslide of 2017, but I would still, I don't know, maybe be comfortable even with 40 seats. Of course, I can go wrong, and I know I'm slipping away from the general polling consensus also, which has been very close fights. But I think I'm fairly comfortable thinking that the BJP can pull it off in Uttarakhand.
So before we go to the not so insignificant state of Uttar Pradesh, let's quickly cover Goa. And we did have a conversation 3 4 weeks back on Goa, but elections happened. Maybe vote polling percentage couple of points down compared to last time. What's the general sense? I mean, like always, Goa is a very small state. Margins are thin, and it's. I know it's a maybe a pollster's. It's a nightmare. Actually, very difficult for any pollsters to really get it right, given the small margins. Last day plays a few hundred votes here and there make a difference, and there are never waves or this. Maybe barring 2012 in some sense in the last 20 years it's personality driven elections, but all said and done, what's your feeling? What are the 2 or 3 factors which probably will count in the ultimately in Goa results?
I think two, three things will matter for Goa, right? The first is there's something we touched upon in our discussion a couple of weeks back. Is that as the polls came closer, it was clear that there was massive Christian consolidation for the Congress party. I mean, that was something we had discussed in the polls initially. Some in on our podcast, and initially some of the polls were actually saying that the Congress would be third, etc. And AAP could contest. AAP was being a spoiler. TMC was being a spoiler, etc., etc. But I think one thing we were taking away was that it's highly likely that Christians will consolidate in the end behind the Congress. And if you look at how the church put its thoughts out, there was a interview of a leading church official in News Laundry, where I think he sort of made it. You could read between the lines and clearly understand that the church at least clearly wanted a Congress, was at least rooting for a Congress win. And by I think the last week, everyone, almost all the pollsters on Twitter and people who were giving their ideas, the last polls, everyone had seen a Congress resurgence, right? I mean, from what looked like being a khichdi sort of a thing where the BJP had a clear edge over a bunch of disunited opposition, it became that Congress was the opposition. The defection of Michael Lobo, I think early January, played a big part in this, because that gave a boost to the Congress when they were literally running out of MLAs, right? I mean, at some point, I think Digambar Kamath was the only MLA of the Congress who was left in the party of the people who had been elected in 2017. But then Michael Lobo joined the Congress. Then I think that was followed by Carlos Almeida of the BJP also joining the Congress. You can see the pattern, right? I mean, Christian MLAs who were in the BJP, except a few, they were going to the Congress. A lot of others wanted to go, but they weren't taken back. Alexio Reginaldo quit the Congress, went to the TMC. He wanted to go back to the Congress. He wasn't taken in. So you can clearly see that was, I think, the basic part of it. But and that's, I think, driven most of the commentary around Goa, right? I mean, this consolidation will mean that the Congress will win Goa, because it's very clear that the Christians and with the Congress, and there's been a lot of chatter ever since Manohar Parrikar's win in 2012 that Goa is a state where the BJP gets Christian votes, and see, the Christians are going away from the BJP. That means the BJP is in trouble. Now, I mean, that's not necessarily true, right? I mean, end of the day, Goa only has around 26% Christian population as per the 2011 census. So that's not really very, it's not a Christian majority state by any stretch of the imagination. And I think that's where the BJP will have an advantage, right? Because the BJP, or at least will make sure that it's in the race, because I wouldn't stick my neck out here, unlike Uttarakhand, and say that, the BJP has a clear advantage over the Congress. But I mean, they also managed to import a lot of strongmen, right? I mean, Vishwajit Rane, Babush Montserrat, who, of course, has become infamous as the man who stole Utpal Parikar's seat, etc. So these are people who, just on their own, I think the two couples will probably give an extra +4 to the BJP, right? And three of those seats were with the Congress in 2017. Then you have a couple of seats where the BJP poached people from the Congress, and the Congress is no longer competitive in that seat, right? I mean, of seats that the Congress won in 2017, Mandram is an example where BJP poached Dayanand Sopte, who was in the Congress. He's now the BJP candidate. And it's a tripartite fight, but the Congress is not among the three, right? I mean, it's between the MGP and on one side, and Lakshmikant Parsekar, the ex-CM, is fighting as a BJP rebel. So that's one seat. Tivim is another where, it's a BJP versus TMC fight. Congress not in the picture. So at least like that, what that's done, I think, if you ask me, is while there is greater minority consolidation than last time, and there is probably a fair amount of anti-incumbency, though there is some disagreement on this, right? I mean, there are some people who claim the Sawant government is more popular for whatever it's worth than the Parsekar government. But whatever it is, these importing of strongmen at least has really helped the BJP make it an equal fight, I would say, with the Congress. I don't think there's a clear advantage. BJP has also done decent ticket distribution. I mean, seats that it gave up in 2017 due to bad distribution, like Kanko, right, where Ramesh Tavarkar stood as an independent. He's been given the BJP ticket. And there seems to be general consensus that he'll probably win the seat. So that's BJP's managed to poach Govind Gaude in Priol and make it a direct fight with the MGP. Even a seat like Ponda, well, it's probably not BJP advantage. Ravi Naik at least make sure that, I mean, BJP is in the fight, right? So the BJP, whatever its problems of narrative and minority consolidation, it's increased the sheer number of seats it's contesting on, right? And increasing the denominator is a sure shot way of increasing your chances. So I wouldn't think Goa is baked in for the Congress, but it's definitely a tight fight.
And you mentioned about Christian consolidation. Do you think there would have been a Hindu counter consolidation, given that everyone was wooing this? And for the first time, Parsekar was a bit different because there was still perception he was remote controlled by Parrikar in some way. But first time, like a non-Brahmin CM from the middle classes, and which obviously humongous in numbers. Do you think such a counter Hindu consolidation could have happened? Is it possible? And because Congress seemed to be boxed in the GSB, which is a 2-3% community and Christians, the rest of the space opened up for BJP. Is that a possibility? And do you think BJP can surprise and be 20 plus? I mean, of course, my personal gut feel is maybe Congress has the edge, but is such a surprise possible?
It's a very good question, right? I mean, I wouldn't want to answer it beyond a point because there's been no one who's caught on to this, right? I mean, what you mentioned is a very plausible explanation, but at least none of the people who have gone on the ground or reported on Goa, from Rajdeep to News Laundry to even some of the more pro BJP analysts, pollsters, etc., caught on to this point that if you look at it, the first Christian CM of Goa only turned up in 1990, right? I mean, that was like some really random government, and in some ways you could say it started off the trend of instability that's been the feature of Goa politics since then. But otherwise, for the first 27 years, I mean, Goa, while it was first, of course, under MGP, which is the most pure personification of the trend that you are referring to, and even under Pratap Singh Rani, it was the state was fairly politically almost totally under the domination of Hindu non-Brahmins, right, in some form or the other. Like the MGP, of course, was the epitome of that under both Dayanand Bandodkar and his daughter Shashikala Kakodkar. And even under, when the Congress managed to get power, and while it got most of the old UGP vote, the the extra boost really came from people like Pratap Singh Rane, right? I mean, parts of Goa where the Congress or the UGP never really had a base and were the heart of this kind of politics. It moved to the Congress just because of individual personalities, Pratap Singh Rane being the most obvious, but there were a few others in the later days. Even Ravi Naik, you can say, started the trend. Then there was the extreme north, Desha Prabhu, right? I think Jitendra Desha
Yeah,
Prabhu.
Jitendra Deshprabhu, paid
So
name.
he used to get these were all booster seats, right? I mean, for the Congress. And if you look at it, this is the first election where the Congress is absolutely denuded of any boosters in these areas, right? I mean, if you look at the entire 16 seats that you can call the new conquest, right? I mean, if you look at the old MGP victories, it really relied on sweeping the new conquests and getting a few seats here and there in Bardes, etc. This is the first time the Congress has totally been wiped out before the election in these areas. I mean, today Congress has a chance in Sangwem. They have a good chance in Kwepem. Again, two seats with higher than typical minority population for these areas, and they have a chance in Ponda again, pretty much for the same reasons. But in the remaining 13 seats, the Congress is really not in the picture, right? I mean, it's the BJP against an assortment of people, if at all there is a contest. I mean, Subhash Shirodkar used to win from Shiroda. Again, he's no longer there. The Congress is left playing around. They used to even win seats here and there. They won even even Pali they won before. Like while people are saying that Dr. Sawant is in trouble, I think that's a bit of a wish casting by a lot of
Yeah,
people.
I think he might be elected with at least in the top five margins, if not because the Ranis, Digambar Kamath, Michael Lobo might have higher margins, but Dr.
Sudhin Davlekar. But
Sudhir
yeah, I think
Davlikar. Yeah, but I think he
I
will
think
be
he's in
top
this.
20%, top
Yeah,
25, top
he'll be in this
6 to
category.
10. Maybe he'll be in
Yeah,
6 to 10
yeah,
because last time the Goa Suraksha Manch had also cut his
cut
vote.
a lot of
That's
his
a
votes.
factor which everyone has conveniently
Forgotten.
forgotten. I mean, Goa Suraksha Manch cut votes everywhere. I mean, in few key seats like Sankli, Mandrem, again against Parsekar, it was like a personal conquest. Then Panji, whatever little. So I think that's it's a bit far fetched. It's a I think wishful thinking on some people's
Yeah.
part.
So I think the chances of what you described of some sort of greater Hindu consolidation than before, just because it's a non-Brahmin or a Bahujan CM, that might be on. That's theoretically possible. At least MLAs have defected in that pattern, and the candidates have also moved. Like Ajit Arolkar thought he would do better in the MGP than in the Congress. The Congress held the seat before. So what's the reason we don't know, but you don't but at least it's not been picked up in the media. So let's see what the results are, and it might be a factor. And obviously, well, the same factor can carry on even in the other seats because there are outside Salsat, there are no real Christian majority seats. So, and most of those are Hindu majority, obviously lesser numbers, but the underlying factors will probably be the same. But let's see if that happens.
So yeah, I mean, I agree with you. It's a close fight, and maybe some seats might be so close that it's always possible that instead of 17-13, it can be 13-17 and vice versa. So I think these are too small. Anyway, let's move to the small state of Uttar Pradesh next, which probably, I mean, I don't know whether it's just me, but seems to be like completely, or is it because of lack of the Prime Minister's rallies, or because of the EC restrictions? I don't know, but somehow no, people are talking more about Michael Lobo than Swami Prasad Maurya, or talking more about Harak Singh Rawat than Shivpal Yadav, and which I think I find it funny, and at the same time, is it like a function of is it such a given result that people don't care about it? There is no juice in that election. Voting percentage are also, at least in the BJP stronghold, seem to be lower. I mean, I don't know how to read all this, but maybe I thought this is a good forum to ask that question. Why is that? Is it just me, or are you also feeling this lack of interest, or maybe lack of commensurate interest, let me put it this way, in UP, be it in the news media, people talking so much more about Channi, Dr. Sawant, about Dhami, but very few people actually relatively talking about the most important state of Uttar Pradesh.
I think if you look at the polls, right, I mean, all the polls seem to be unidirectional. And at some point, at some level, I mean, I know that a lot of people don't trust polls in India, but and with good reason also maybe. But if you just look at them, it's clear that the consensus is that it's unidirectional, right? I mean, there are many reasons why that is possibly the case. The BJP definitely, while what it seemed like a huge gamble in 2017, probably is the smartest decision of the term, right? I mean, politically, the entire Modi prime ministership making Yogi Adityanath the chief minister of UP, it's totally given a different pattern to the elections there, managed to relatively insulate the BJP from a lot of caste intricacies. While, of course, people who are hoping that there is a close contest have come up with all sorts of theories. It just looks like that. And I mean, what you can also see is that, before the first phase, there was so much in UP, there was so much talk about the Jats and things like that. But what's happened, and this has happened over the last three elections now, right? I mean, 17, 19, and this. People broadly lose interest once you reach the third phase, fourth phase. Only the people in those seats really care anymore. Because, I mean, there seems to be some sort of a trend, and like there's no Jat angle to really make everyone go gaga over it. There was a lot of interest, if you ask me, before phase one and in the couple of days after phase one. But once Goa and Uttarakhand voted, people have moved on to that. And then, after 14th, the last 5 days, at least if you look at my Twitter feed or, I think yours also, it's all been this highly entertaining war between Aam Aadmi Party supporters and Congress supporters of Punjab. Right? Like it's just been all about that. UP, I mean, I did a podcast last week on another platform, not last, a couple of weeks back on another platform. I think UP has a lot of fundamental things going for the BJP, right? And at least I haven't seen anything that seems to suggest that any of that is not the case in this election for there to be anything more than a fairly comfortable win for the BJP. I don't think BJP can reach the margins it did last time simply because there's much higher Muslim consolidation this time, especially in phase 1 and 2. I think the BJP probably, at least in phase 1, is definitely losing a minimum of 15 seats, if you ask me. At least minimum of 10 to 15 seats, if you ask me, and around 10 seats at least in phase 2 from 2017. But the delta last time was so high that that's the only number, right? The entire narrative of, so it had to be that in addition to Muslim consolidation, there were some groups that were moving away, some other groups, right? And first, the whole you took the name of Swami Prasad Maurya, and for a couple of days, people went on and on about how him moving away would, show that the non-Yadav OBCs or would move away from the BJP. Now, the first thing you would need to look at is that the non-Yadav OBCs is a BJP creation. I mean, BJP calls certain castes non-Yadav OBCs because they think that every OBC who's not a Yadav can be persuaded to vote for the BJP. It's not that all non-Yadav OBCs think, oh, we are all non-Yadav OBCs, then Swami Prasad Maurya is our leader. I mean, like, we'll get to the second part later, but the first
Is it
part
a bit like, is it a bit like Channi being called leader of all Dalits, and I mean, even worse probably.
That's a very good analogy, right? And I mean, because in the Dalits case in Punjab, at least that's a government created category, right? I mean, the government has listed certain castes as scheduled castes. Similarly in Punjab, and similarly in UP, the government has classified certain castes as other backward castes, but it's only the BJP that's created non-Yadav OBCs. I mean, nobody else has, because there's no reason for any other Like if it was a BSP, they might have created non-Yadav, non-Lodh OBCs, right? Because the Lodhs are BJP supporters. Or if it's the SP, they would have obviously created Yadav plus plus OBC. So
Yadav plus.
this category itself is absurdly artificial if you're trying to look at people who are moving away from the BJP. I mean, it's just very convenient shorthand, right? And on top of that, to somebody like Swami Prasad Maurya, who, I mean, Swami Prasad Maurya's best days are behind him, right? Like, why did he join the BJP in 2016? I think if he joined the SP in 2016, things might have been different because in 2016, he was definitely the tallest Maurya leader in Uttar Pradesh. And, if you look at it in some form of, and again, using the non-Yadav OBC classification, you look at the other big OBC leaders in Uttar Pradesh, except Akhilesh Yadav, who's a Yadav, and Kalyan Singh, who by then was no longer active in politics, you can make a convincing argument that it was Swami Prasad Maurya, right, who was who was the tallest leader of all of these communities, though they are not one community. But today that's not the case, right? I mean, Anupriya Patel has been really built up by the BJP in some ways. She's also put in a lot of effort to become a very big Kurmi leader, at least in a few districts. On the other side, you have Om Prakash Rajbar, who has been propped up by multiple people. He's also put in a lot of efforts. He's a significantly important leader. You have the Nishat Party chief, who's again managed to carve out the Nishats from this non-Yadav OBC amalgam and made himself into a fairly reasonable leader. And then the BJP has a plethora of leaders, right? It's not like one or two. You have Swatandra Dev Singh, who's the state president of the
You
BJP.
forgotten
Exactly right. I mean, that was coming to him. And on top of all of these guys, you have the deputy CM who is, I mean, while UP has two deputy chief ministers, it's clear that Keshav Prasad Maurya is the most, like, he is the number two in the state, right? I mean, he is today probably the tallest Maurya leader in UP. Forget, non-Yadav OBC leaders. So this case, Swami Prasad Maurya seemed a bit of a hot air balloon, and you can see what happened, right? I mean, the moment RPN Singh joined the BJP, it was clear he wouldn't win his own seat. He went off somewhere else. Then the BSP has a vendetta against him for obvious reasons. Now they've fielded a Muslim there. It seems that he's in deep trouble in Fazil Nagar. He may end up winning the seat. I don't know, but I mean, he still definitely has a chance just because of his stature. But I mean, running away from your own seat, and you can give it as many interpretations as possible, right? I mean, if he had announced he would do that before RPN Singh joined the BJP, his denials might still sound more plausible from a narrative perspective, right? I mean, maybe he always wanted to contest from Fazil Nagar. We don't know. But at least to the average voter, it looks like he's running away. And I mean, that's not good, right? I mean, if you're, the SP also has had serious issues in ticket distribution beyond phase 3, right? I mean, for phase 1 and 2 were Muslim strongholds. Phase 3 has a lot of Yadav strongholds in it. But phase 4, phase 5, these are places where the SP, while it has won before, it has issues there. I mean, phase 5, for instance, entire Devi Patan SP relied on a Muslim Kurmi Yadav coalition. Muslim leaders have been quitting the SP left, right, and center for a variety of ticket issues there. Kurmis initially came to the SP there under Beni Prasad Verma. He's no more. He had also ended his career out. I think he ended his career in the SP, but in the middle, he had gone to the Congress, and he was responsible for the Congress getting some offshoots in Devi Patan in 2009. So, I mean, there's been a general, the SP has withered away in some of these areas, and I don't see how, they're really able to pull back in these places. Like the RLD, the farmer protest, there were two significant boosters in phase 1, but those simply don't exist beyond phase 3, and you're down to, some of your older narratives. And I don't know how much it will work. Of course, the SP will probably still do well in the regions in Purvanchal, between the Ganga and the Gagra, where you have Muslims, Yadavs, and Jatavs in good number, where the Jatavs probably will vote for the BSP. And BJP has historically had issues. Om Prakash Rajbar is a player there. Even the Chauhan community is a player there. So, Jaunpur, Ghazipur, Azamgarh, Mau, these are places where, BJP will probably struggle a bit. But again, I mean, these are not places that are BJP strongholds, right? Like the BJP can win 0 in these 4 districts and still comfortably get 230, 240. So like that's the issue that the SP is facing, and at least I can't see anything that's really sort of changed in these areas, if you ask me.
But tell me one thing, I mean, on that topic, since you are saying Jatavs, and I assume in the Rohilkhand area, which is the phase two, also there are a lot of Jatavs, and I think which is why it was such a great sort of shield for the SP BSP alliance in the 2019 Lok Sabha election. I think that's the region where the alliance won the maximum seats, if I'm not mistaken. It's like Saharanpur, Rampur, all the entire that division, Amroha. Now, uh, tell me one thing. I mean, what's the general Jatav behavior? I mean, they are a significant percentage. They stood with Mayawati. Is there any chance they sort of vote either SP or BJP? Given, I mean, Mayawati seems strangely absent. Maybe she might not do as bad as. What maybe some like single digits and all, but still, do you think there is a chance some the Jata vote 30-40% leaking to either of these parties? And if yes, then what are the implications for the results? Maybe the phase between Ghagra and Ganga, those 4-5 districts, and phase two of Rohilkhand.
I think if you talk about the Jatavs, a lot of people when they started this initially started doing the numbers, and people who were especially boosting the SP, they really missed out on the fact that in 2019, you can say whatever boost was got from Jats, farmer protests, etc. You had the entire BSP vote with you, right? Which has gone away. So you were starting off a bit considerably behind from your 2019 baseline, the SP alliance I'm talking about here. And Akhilesh Yadav interestingly recognized this, right? He did this whole pitch of being a Lohiya-wadi, Samajwadi, Ambedkar-wadi. So he realized that any lasting opposition to the BJP in UP would need a significant Jatav or Dalit or a Jatav presence at least. He was really trying for it, but at least in Rohilkhand, what we've seen is, and what we need to understand is, parts of Rohilkhand have historically had very low BSP votes, right? Especially Moradabad, Bareilly, Rampur. BSP votes even in 2017 were below 10%, probably because of the heavy amount of polarization that exists in these regions. It was below 10%, and what at least we've observed, again from what I have been able to gather from people I know on the ground and on media, social media, etc. In Rohilkhand, at least the Jatavs, if they didn't stick with the BSP, they seem to have gone with the BJP. I mean, there's a fairly strong undercurrent on Twitter, at least, that and I think a lot of pro BJP people are exaggerating the impact. I don't think a large number of Jatavs have moved to the BJP, or that's not there, but it appears to be the case that they definitely didn't move to the SP, and that's, I think, what the BJP at least needs at a state level, right? Of course, to win a few extra seats in Moradabad or Saharanpur or Bijnor, the BJP would definitely benefit from an extra boost of Jatav voting. But even if that didn't happen, the rest of the state, they are fine. Like for them, the bigger issue is that the Jatav shouldn't go to the SP. And the other point, I think, is that the BSP has given really good tickets in a lot of places. I mean, they've fielded Muslims in a lot of places. They've fielded upper caste in a lot of places. And there is going to be, and this does two things, right? One is that it might impact the candidates community, like Muslims might vote for the BSP, or the upper caste might vote for the BSP, or whichever other community they've given the ticket to might vote for the BSP. The more important thing it does, if you ask me, is that it also signals to the Jatavs that, and the one thing is, in most general seats, it's not like Jatavs expect a candidate from their community. That is also even from the BSP, that's very clear. So Jatavs also expect that, BSP is taking the fight seriously, right? So if you give, like for instance, Swami Prasad Maurya's seat, they've given, or Om Prakash Rajbar's seat, the BSP has given ticket to a former SP MLA who's very strong there right now. I'm not sure how much Muslim votes she will get, because at least in Western UP, there was huge Muslim consolidation for the SP, which was not seen in 2017 also. Now there's some theory that, as you move eastwards, this Muslim consolidation also reduces, which from past empirical evidence is true, but I don't know how much it will replicate this time. But the least it will do, give something like this, it tells the Jatovs at least that see the BSP has a chance to win this seat. Don't waste your vote. So to the bare minimum, it definitely it's hurting Akhilesh's ambition of getting Ambedkar Wadis onto this alliance using his own term.
Got it. And yeah, you were mentioning, I mean, this OP Rajbar seat itself, I think there Shadab Fatima has been fielded by
Correct,
BJP,
correct,
by the BSP, sorry,
correct.
ex-SP. And when I was reading some tidbits where like BSP seemed to have done some smart ticketing, changed tickets, and are in contention. And of course, it's tough to figure out. I mean, UP, there is so much noise usually around, difficult to believe what's true and what's not. But yeah, because I remember last 2 3 elections, not 2019, but before that, be it 14, 17, people used to say everyone is underestimating the BSP, but actually people are overestimated the BSP even in
That's
polls.
right.
So this time around, I mean, everyone seems to have gone the full Monty on the other side and given them 5 seats, 7 seats, and yeah, I mean,
That's
that's
the
where the thought sort of came from. One question, and I mean, I know this is more a rhetorical question: will Congress get any seats, or is it just like, I mean, I don't think they're even. I mean, if you see Mrs. Priyanka Vadra clapping on to Charanjit Singh Channi's statement on the UP Bihar migrants, looks like Congress has completely given up on UP. They are I mean, wasn't reflective of behavior, wasn't reflective of someone who's in charge of UP for the party. I mean, what's the thing, and what happens to the 5 7% or whatever vote percent it used to get so far? I mean, where will it move in the future? I mean, I'm just curious because clearly they are not a player. Maybe they even lose Raebareli in 2024. So, just curious about that.
Congress's core vote in UP has really frittered away, and it's down to a few strongmen, right, who are winning their own seats. And a number of them in Raebareli, especially. I mean, Congress had 7 MLAs last time, I think, of which two were from Raebareli. They have both joined the BJP. One, of course, is Aditi Singh, who's a fairly well-known outside UP. Also, the other is I forgot his name. He's also a Thakur leader. I think, he's the brother of the person who stood on the BJP ticket against Mrs. Sonia Gandhi in 2019. So he's also quit, or is a relative. He's also quit Harchandpur MLA. He's also quit and joined the BJP. Some of the older, very old leaders of the Congress have moved on, right? Like there's Praveen Singh Aaron in Bareilly, who had become the MP in 2009. Only time Santosh Gangwar has lost Bareilly since 89. He's moved on to the Samajwadi Party. There have been a few others. So I think the two seats I would expect the Congress to probably win for sure today are Ajay Kumar, Lalu, and Tamkui Raj, where the BJP has again sort of messed up its candidature, or I think it's the Nishat party, but I mean, the NDA sort of messed up its candidature, and definitely expect Mona Mishra to win in Rampur Khas, Pramod Tiwari's daughter. So those are two seats that I probably think the Congress would definitely win. The remaining seats, I think there were two that they had won in Saharanpur, Imran Masood and Masood Akhtar, who joined the SP, though they didn't get a ticket. So I think that clearly shows the issue the Congress faced in that part of UP, at least in Saharanpur. They completely wiped out there. A few of the other old leaders, I mean, they're still fighting. Ajay Kapoor in Kanpur. I don't think he really has a chance. There's Pradeep Mathur in Mathura. There'll be a couple of people who will try again in Lucknow. In the cities, basically, I think the Congress will still end up with 3 to 4% of the vote at least. But I mean, the seats where they have the winnable candidates are reducing, which is a big, which is quite counterintuitive considering the amount of media attention that went into the whole campaign of Mrs. Priyanka over the last few years, and the ladki who lad sakti hu thing and all of that. There's a lot of media attention, but I think the results are going to be even worse than last time. Though, to be fair, last time they were held by the SP being in alliance. So at least some of these guys only won because of that. I think for instance, Ajay Kumar Lalu would definitely have probably lost if there was an SP candidate against him, but it's different. I mean,
So I mean, net, where are you in terms of how where will the dice, what how will the die look like when it's fully cast on 10th March for UP?
I think the BJP will get a majority. I wouldn't expect it to go below 235.
Okay,
But whenever people have asked me my numbers on UP over the last three, like even 17 and 19, I've always said the upside is unlimited. And I think fundamentally that's the case in UP even today. The upside is always unlimited for the BJP.
got it.
I mean, it will
Now,
lose some seats in phase one and maybe a few in phase two, but it can make up. I mean, I don't know if it can make up, but it can definitely get a lot of seats in the rest of the state about 235.
so I mean, if I were to sort of summarize, because and I know things change. In 2018, BJP lost three key elections, and 2019 they swept those three states and nationally as well by a huge margin. So it's always a bit tricky and this to say what are national implications. But before I go there, one final question on Manipur. I mean, that's the fifth one. I don't know much about the state. I was just reading some news flow, and Northeast essentially has become a one party elections. I mean, somehow, and the NEDA by Dr. HBS always ends up having its CM there, supported by BJP or a BJP CM, or BJP has some role. What's your quick view on Manipur before we head to national implications of these elections? And yeah,
I think Manipur, what I have at least understood is that before the elections, everyone wanted a BJP ticket. I think Manipur is similar to Uttarakhand and Goa in the sense that there are a lot of local factors, more similar to Goa than Uttarakhand, considering the respective size of the state. Everyone wanted a BJP ticket for some of the reasons that you mentioned, but obviously the BJP wasn't able to satisfy everyone, and so a lot of people have moved on to other parties, including the Congress, the NPP, which is of course nationally and at the state previously an ally of the BJP, but fights separately. Then I think there is also the Apna Dal, which is giving some fights. The JDU has fielded candidates in Manipur. But beyond that, I think you look at Manipur as three zones, right? One is the Imphal Valley, which I think is around 40 seats, which is predominantly Methi dominated. That's the Manipuri people, and then the 20 seats of the hills, right, which are broadly divided between the Nagas and the Kukis. So I think what the BJP has tried to focus on at least is maximize its seats among the Meithis, but there's going to be a lot of individualized voting there. Also sweep the Kuki seats and hope that it's ally the NPF, with which it has a hot cold relationship, which I think has more to do with how the Nagaland peace process goes than anything else. Wins seats in the Naga dominated areas. So I do think it will end up with an NDA government. I'm not sure of the exact numbers. There are too many rebels and too many candidates floating around for you to get a clear picture. But I think the Congress is definitely weaker than it was in 2017, where if you remember, they were actually the single largest party, right? Even though the BJP got more votes. It's probably not going to be the case anymore, and you're going to see a substantially smaller Congress party in Manipur. But the Congress does have its base in Manipur, and it's giving more of a fight than it has in some of the other northeastern states where Dr. SBS has really cleaned up the Congress, like Arunachal Pradesh is the best example of that, or even to a lesser extent Nagaland, which has been having really weird politics where everyone is in the ruling alliance. So some things are happening, but I think Manipur is more of a fight to that extent than the other states. Again, Manipur, because of its substantial Hindu population, it's not a majority, but there's a plurality of Hindus there, just about. Is like Arunachal and Tripura, and of course Assam, a state where the BJP has its own CM in Biren Singh. It doesn't have an allied party, which is the case in Meghalaya or Nagaland, and that's more down to demographics. And so, to that extent, Manipur is more of a prestige fight for the BJP, though I think they will manage to pull through by the end.
Got it. So I think let's jump into the final part. It's been a long a discussion. I mean, at least what you seem to be suggesting, if results go that way, what happens? I mean, I know Congress is a family-run party, anyways, but there have been murmurs, the G23 making a move, trusted lieutenants like Ashwini Kumar moving out, and they might have their own reasons. But how do you think this plays out? Is it Mamta Banerjee or some other leader making a play for 2024 leadership? I think that also seems to be a bit on thin ice after this fallout with Prashant Kishore. How do you think national politics evolves? 2024 is still too far off to say what impact it could have on 2024. But just the next 6 8 months, what are the possible moves? And let's assume for a moment two scenarios that forget UP. Say Congress loses Uttarakhand, Punjab. I'm keeping Goa aside for the moment, but say Uttarakhand and Punjab, where it's like they're more in the national this. But what's the implication you think for the Congress?
I think that's I think you identified the core states here, right? I mean, if you ask me at a national election level, for the BJP, of course, the most important state is UP, right? I mean, it's a must-win state. If the BJP loses UP, it will face serious issues. It has to go back to the drawing board on multiple fronts. But but I think the BJP can afford a loss in Uttarakhand or Goa for that matter, or a loss in Uttarakhand and Goa also. I mean, while I don't think the former is likely, but I don't think it's going to really change anything beyond a point for the BJP, right? I mean, it will be a personal blow to the Prime Minister for sure if the BJP loses Uttarakhand because he seems very emotionally invested in the state. But at a national level, I don't think the BJP will really lose sleep if it wins UP. I mean, that's its basic requirement. Everything else is a bonus. I think that's the converse is true for the Congress, right? I mean, whatever happens in UP. So if the BJP loses UP, then the Congress doesn't need to care about anything. I mean, it's all hunky dory for them. They can look forward to Gujarat and Himachal and see what's happening. But if the BJP wins UP, then the Congress has to win one of Punjab and Uttarakhand, if you ask me. Uh, I think there would be serious issues for the Congress party if it loses both Punjab and Uttarakhand. As you rightly said, you should keep Goa aside because it's a very unique state. It has its idiosyncrasies, and you know, like if the Congress wins, it's probably going to win just about get the majority or be an SLP, and it's too small a state to really. And it's again a very heavily minority-dominated state, so that to a Christian minority, which is not really a big player at a national level. So let's leave Goa aside. The Congress has to win one of Punjab and Uttarakhand, right? I mean, it's the problem for the Congress, and let's leave Mamta Banerjee aside. I think what Goa has shown is that the Trinamool is extremely toxic beyond Bengal, right? I mean, the brand of the party is really toxic. It's really managed to slow even the MGP down. I mean, the original party of the Bahujan Hindus is literally facing a backlash in multiple places because they are aligned with the Trinamool. Like Sudhin Davlekar didn't even turn up for the manifesto launch. So he's clearly seen the writing on the wall. And even in a transactional place like Goa, the Trinamool is a drag. Then the Trinamool really doesn't have much of a future outside Bengal, right? 2 seats in Goa, that's both Tibim and Aldona. I think the two I mean, both Kiran Kandolkar and his wife are in trouble just because they are fighting on a Trinamool ticket. I think if you look at the overall scenario, they probably would have won. They probably would definitely be definite winners on a Congress ticket, a Goa forward ticket, or for that matter, even an MGP ticket, right? I mean, it's that bad for the Trinamool. So I think let's forget about Mamta Banerjee. The problem for the Congress is the AAP. I mean, Uttarakhand and Punjab, again, I mean, more likely than not, the Congress is going to do better. The Congress is not going to win in Punjab, if you ask me. It's in deep trouble in Punjab. It's going to be the AAP as a SLP, if not a majority government. And the AAP has shown an ability to take on the Congress, right? I mean, it created a narrative in Goa. It fell back in the end. It created a narrative in Uttarakhand. It fell back in the end. And that's the important thing, right? It's falling back in the end because people think, oh, is a vote for the AAP a wasted vote? Because a lot, at least the initial voters for the AAP are coming from people who are anti-BJP in all of these states. And these people are, sort of thinking at the last moment, should they actually vote for the AAP, because will it end up in just helping the BJP? Now, if the AAP actually wins a major state, that was a state like Punjab, which under Channi, the Congress has made its poster state. Like he's in the list of star campaigners in Uttarakhand, I think in UP. He's like the poster boy of the new Congress, of Rahul Gandhi's Congress. If Congress loses there, it's going to put serious question marks on its viability, and the AAP has built that effort, right? And it's interesting because the next state up is Himachal. Now, Himachal is a state right next to Punjab and Uttarakhand. It's actually in between the two. It shares borders with both Uttarakhand and Punjab. It has demographic similarities with both these states. It has a BJP government that's fairly unpopular. If there is, I mean, AAP has of course tried to make a lot of inroads in Gujarat, but the BJP seems to be has suddenly become a juggernaut in Gujarat. Let's leave Gujarat aside for the moment, but at least in Himachal, if the AAP makes a play, I think if the Congress loses both these states, and it's in trouble, and then you'll see the AAP sprouting up everywhere. I mean, it's going to take time, right? And what you're going to see, I think, till now, when these people, like you saw Sushmita Dev, and she's not a paper tiger, right? I mean, like, while her politics is definitely very much the extreme of the Congress party.
Bengali centric in Assam is
Yeah,
right in a way. So, but yeah, I mean, you are
he could
sort of.
join the AAP. I mean, she didn't consider the AAP at that point.
She didn't
But
get a Rajya Sabha seat, right?
yeah,
Clearly, nibbling at the edges. I think the Bengali vote. I mean, and Kejriwal is young, right? What and
exactly.
so he has time on his hand. The one thing and he's smart. I mean, while we might disagree with his politics or his approach, but there's no denying the fact that after being in the media every day, he suddenly pulled himself back ahead of Delhi 2020 and focused on electioneering. So I have to hand it to him for all his whatever we don't like or might like about him. So one thing is, I mean, Congress seems to have this habit of building CM poster boys, probably Bhupesh Baghel in the last round of elections. Now you have Channi, I mean,
Siddaramaiah in 2018 when he lost.
Siddaramaiah, right? So Siddaramaiah in
So
20
he had
when
become a national leader for a few months.
yeah, correct. So I think what is that symbolic of? Because I mean, Channi probably wasn't even a Congressy, and he was an independent candidate or MLA in 2012 or 2007. I don't remember exactly. Siddaramaiah, though, is a socialist. I mean, he was not even a long-term Congressy. What's it? Is it like what is it symptomatic of?
We've discussed this on some of the older episodes on this podcast. Rahul Gandhi clearly has an ideological vision for the Congress, right, which is substantially to the left of where the median Indian voter is on many issues. It might, and you can see that in speech after speech, right? And I'm not even going to economic policy, where probably, where Priyanka said yesterday that PSUs are the future, etc. Probably a lot of people do agree with that more, but at least on social issues, they are substantially to the left, and all of these leaders we have mentioned seem to come from that angle, right? I mean, whether it's a Siddaramaiah, whether it's a Bhupesh Baghel, whether it's a Channi, they're all people who are, I mean, Channi's response to the whole Firozpur security breach, quote unquote, of the PM, like, where he was fairly blaze about it, right? I mean, whatever, whose fault it wasn't, who was trying to politicize it. He, at least in his mindset, it seemed that it made more sense for him politically to, make that a fight and not douse it. So Siddaramaiah has consistently gone on this approach, even when he was CM and even now. So you can clearly see that there's a specific ideological approach to the Congress. It relies on what you can call woke culture, right? I mean, of course, India is, I mean, if you ask me, the original woke country, right? Like, there are lots of things that are woke about India, even in the 50s, that, the rest of the world is just catching up to. But so that way, the Congress is definitely adopting a quote unquote woke approach. And, looking at something like Priyanka Gandhi making UP elections primarily about a women-centric campaign, where at the same time the most important thing a lot of women, if you ask, mention about UP was law and order, which is not at all in her list of priorities. So it's a very different campaign, and somewhat driven by certain considerations that probably, I mean, appeal to a different class of voter, right? So that's where the Congress is going, and at some point, I don't know, the cookie might fall, right? I think the G23 is irrelevant. Manish Tiwari has been saying some stuff for the other even now, but nobody really bothers about it beyond a point. The G23 itself is irrelevant, but I think you can start to see leaders leave, right? I mean, the Congress leaders, and I mean like district level leaders, assembly level leaders. Those kind of leaders, I think, will start to leave the Congress if they fail to win Punjab and Uttarakhand. I think the only party that today that can hit the Congress is the AAP. I don't, because all of the other, I mean, the Trinamool is toxic beyond redemption, if you ask me, in most parts of India. Most of the other parties are hemmed in their states. I mean, there was Nitish Kumar, but he's now dependent on the BJP to run his own government. And if he switches again, then there's no credibility left. He's clearly not going to be a opposition leader for now. There's KCR who's saying all sorts of things, but I don't think like India is ready for KCR to be a national leader yet. And then NCP was always the best option for this, right? But Sharad Pawar somehow has this thing that he never wants to fully go against the Congress. Like his whole politics, if you look at it from '99, has been to create some sort of a separate pocket for the NCP in state after state, which he uses to negotiate a better deal with the Congress. So to that extent, I don't think the NCP is really anymore in a position to do that. And the Shiv Sena has historical toxicity. On top of that, it's trying to be a new NCP. So I don't think it can really fill the Congress's space anywhere. So I think it's down to the AAP, right? If the AAP wins Punjab, the Congress loses Uttarakhand. BJP wins UP. I think Kejriwal has a lot of places to go to. He should start with Himachal, and he has multiple states he can expand to over the next 2 years.
So one last question, Rohit. I'm already held you back on a Saturday evening. Uh, in a scenario, and I don't know whatever probability BJP wins all five states, of course, would mean for the first time after 2017 UP, BJP has had any real success in assembly elections. I mean, if one were to look at it, analyze, I mean, we get carried away by 2014 and 19 and the 17 UP. Barring that, it's been not even a mixed bag. It's been on average quite a poor performance by BJP in the states. But in the scenario that if BJP wins everything, what are there governments which are going to fall, or is it status quo? How do you really? Of course, there's a presidential election coming up that will definitely strengthen the BJP and all that for its this. But outside of that, politically, what are the implications?
I don't see a lot of upside for the BJP, right? I mean, if you ask me, uh, I mean, I'm being a bit this thing on Uttarakhand, Goa, and some of the other states. But for the BJP, if it wins UP, it's bare minimum, and I don't see much of an upside from that. Like it's on track to get a majority or do well in 2024, but it has a lot of work ahead of it. What would be interesting to from the BJP's perspective is if it wins Uttarakhand, I think it means that the Prime Minister's popularity is definitely intact and a hotbed of his support. And it's one state where his popularity can directly carry into assembly elections, which we haven't seen in many states, as you said, over the past 5 years. If it wins in Goa, I think it would be more interesting from Goa's perspective than from the BJP's perspective. What we discussed about, the whole Hindu vote and all of that. So I think Goan politics will see a difference, but I don't think it will make a big difference to the BJP per se. But Punjab is interesting, right? The BJP is broken away from the Akalis. It doesn't look like it wants to go back in an alliance with them, right? I think they do have good relations with the Akalis, and they wouldn't mind an Akali government, but there seems to be an idea that it's good for both if we are separate. So the BJP, I think, will look at building a long-term base in Punjab. Again, I don't think the BJP is in any position to form a government in Punjab.
Sorry, I mean, I didn't mean Punjab, where Punjab probably BJP gets 10, 12.
Yeah, I got that, but
Yeah.
I'm just saying that BJP would, apart from winning UP, I mean, winning Goa will be feel good, winning Uttarakhand will be very nice, but the BJP would really hope it gets around 8 to 10 seats, right? At least in Punjab. Shows that it has a future there. A couple of Lok Sabha seats it can target in 24, right? I mean, assuming it's nationally, the BJP is ahead. I mean, if it's in the couple of extra seats, Jalandhar is one for sure, Ludhiana maybe, that the BJP
Anandpur
can
Sahib,
target.
Anandpur Sahib as well.
Anandpur Sahib. So there's some seats that the BJP can target for 2024, and clearly they've made a lot of investment in Punjab for whatever reason. The Prime Minister has like literally put his neck out on the line over the last 3-4 days. So clearly there's some idea that they can do something in Punjab, and but I think the longer term implications are more for the Congress, right? It has to win one of the two states I mentioned.
But one
And
last
BJP has to win UP.
Yeah, last question. Assuming BJP wins UP, does the is there? And I know this is politics. A lot of things change in 6 months, 1 month. Does it at least put one candidate ahead in the race to succeed the Prime Minister Modi whenever that happens? Is that sort of a clear leader, or you think? I mean, not really. I mean, there are others who can definitely make a play.
I wouldn't want to get into. So I think the biggest thing we need to understand here is that it really depends on 2024, right? Because I think if the Prime Minister is going to remain Prime Minister after 24 is when all of these questions arise in such a stark thing. In that, I think we'll presuppose that there's a BJP majority in 24, like a BJP majority, not an NDA majority. If there's a BJP majority in 24, I think if Yogi Adityanath gets a majority in UP on 10th of March, he's definitely the front runner, right? I mean, if you look at it logically, you don't make somebody who has a personal base of his own the chief minister of UP for 5 years, and you've allowed him to build a brand, right? I mean, Yogi has been campaigning in state after state over the last 5 years. Like, you are different people in different states are propping up random, priest leaders as that area is Yogi. Like, there's an Andhra Yogi, a Telangana Yogi, a Rajasthan Yogi. All of these guys are around, and so clearly that's because Yogi's created some sort of an impact beyond UP, and that's obviously happened because the national leadership has given him this platform. One, by obviously making him the chief minister of UP, and two, by allowing him to act like a campaigner outside UP, right? So that's, I mean, he would definitely be a front runner, but it really depends on the numbers, right? Because I don't think any other party is going to vote to make Yogi this PM. So unless there's a BJP majority after 24, this question itself becomes moot. But yes, if there is a BJP majority, I think it's reasonable to. And also, if you look at this entire UP election, the Prime Minister has kept himself in the background. It's been a Yogi show, right? I mean, you look at even BJP videos, compare Uttarakhand to Uttar Pradesh, you can see the difference, right? Like, Uttarakhand is all about the Prime Minister, Uttar Pradesh is all about the Prime Minister and Yogi. If you see videos on the ground from people are talking about Yogi. Like, everyone, of course, says, the Prime Minister's government, the Prime Minister's work, but he's sort of managed to keep himself above the fray, I would say, in UP. And that's important, right? I mean that clearly points to something. If you ask me, you can't brush it.
Is the first time you think and I would not hazard a guess, but probably at least the CM of BJP state has probably at least as much popularity as the Prime Minister, or at least generating enough, as much noise or recall as the Prime Minister, for the first time in terms of positive recall. Let me put it this way.
I think Yogi is getting popularity. Of course, there's a lot of overlap to the popularity, but there's some difference also. And that's probably a evolution of the party, right? I mean, and that's something that the Prime Minister himself set his ground on, that the party is reorienting itself more into a party of the lower middle class, the lower classes. It's not like, I don't think you'll ever see the kind of support for the Prime Minister got in 2014 among the upper middle class. You'll never see that for Yogi, right? But I think that's something that's been priced in. And but yeah, there's clear overlap, and of course, I mean, he's clearly in popularity the second most popular BJP leader in India, right? I don't want to take a guess, but if he wins on March 10th, I would say the second most popular politician in India. So
Thanks, Rohit. This was a fascinating discussion. I hope all the viewers also found it fascinating. Do hit us up and give all your feedback, bad, good, constructive, destructive. Always important for us to improve on those. Thank you, Rohit. Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Bharatvaarta podcast. If you want to see more content like this, then don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We started Bharatvaarta to facilitate long form discussions on politics, policy, and culture. We don't necessarily endorse anything that was said in this episode. If you wish to offer us feedback, do reach out to us on social media. We are at Bharatvaarta on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You could also get in touch with us on our website www.bharatvarta.in. The links are in the description below. Until next time, stay safe, take care, and Jai Hind.